people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
To the mother relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Rumors abound. Twitter user that goes by the name Ozzy Smith says, Boxer is set to stage the world welterweight title fight between Lauren Price and Jessica McCaskill on April 20th in Cardiff, in spite of a recent post from the World Boxing Council that Jessica will be fighting Ivana Habazin, her mandatory challenger, which we've talked about. In truth, I heard this rumor myself. I heard this rumor about 2 weeks ago, and I have it on good authority that Jessica's going to be fighting Lauren. She's not going to be fighting Ivana. The way they set it up, one of the belts might stay with Ivana, but the other will be on the line in McCaskill versus Price.
So if it happens...
If this rumor turns out to be true, and I have it on good authority it's going to, I think Jessica's going to lose. I'm going to be honest here. I've supported Jessica over the years, and I can only describe her as an overachiever, a two-division champion, unified in one, undisputed in another.
She's done well for herself.
In spite of what some like to describe as a very messy style, a gutting and gritty fighter who's very accomplished in spite of her technical limits.
She beat Erica Farias, what was then the #1 super lightweight in the world. She beat Cecilia Brækhus, what was then the #1 welterweight in the world.
She's been there and done that with a lot of good fighters. She's won some fights, she's lost some fights, and if this rumor checks out,
she's gonna lose this one.
Unfortunately for Jessica, at this stage, and at this age, when she's in her late 30s, I think she's going to lose a decision to Lauren Price. That's what I think. I think Jessica can make it interesting. She can make it interesting in spots because punch for punch, I think she's stronger than Lauren, but not faster. She doesn't have faster feet or faster hands.
She's lost a step,
leaving her open for a lot of shots, a lot of punches as she barrels forward, throwing those big looping hooks, looping shots.
She's lucky to still have a belt.
And I have nothing against Jessica. I told you, I've been a fan of her for many years, but if I'm going to call a spade, Sandy Ryan already beat her. That fight shouldn't have been scored a draw.
Sandy won.
Jessica lost. If she even has a belt to put up for Lauren Price or anybody, she's very, very fortunate.
But her luck has run out.
You saw what just happened to Michaela Mayer on a boxer show opposite the ring, Natasha Jonas. Most people that saw the fight scored it for Michaela Mayer. And in spite of all her efforts, Natasha got the decision. Natasha got the nod. She's the house fighter, the hometown fighter. So what do you think happens with Lauren Price? An Olympic upstart that boxer is just as invested in.
Short of a knockout, Jessica don't win that fight.
If Ben Shalom has to rob Peter to pay Paul to ensure that Lauren wins the fight, he will.
Does he have to?
No, that doesn't necessarily mean that he has to. It's entirely possible that given Lauren Price's amateur pedigree, her speed, her movement, her athleticism, and sharpness, it's entirely possible that she can beat Jessica legitimately, and she might. I'm just saying that if she doesn't, that it's close enough that you could swing it either way, they'll swing it Lauren's way.
Wake up and smell the home cooking.
Because it can happen. It's happened before. It could happen again. Hook or by crook. I don't see Jessica winning this fight, and this might be her final fight. Beyond this, I think she'll retire.
What about Ivana Habazin?
Initially, she was Jessica's mandatory challenger. Very soon, she could be elevated to a full champion, with which organization, I'm not completely sure. But what I was told was that one of the belts might stay with Ivana.
So put your thinking caps on, kids.
Lauren Price is not the only welterweight boxer is invested in. They're also invested in Natasha Jonas, who I just mentioned.
If Jessica's not fighting Ivana, that would leave Ivana Habazin free to fight Natasha Jonas for what could be not one, but 2 alphabet titles.
Jessica fights Lauren, Ivana fights Natasha, because Natasha doesn't look to be running it back with Mccaskill. I've heard nothing about a second fight.
Thus, I wouldn't be surprised to see Natasha opposite the ring Ivana for 2 alphabet titles.
So I think all of this is going to break down how I think that cookie is going to crumble. All we need is an official announcement. Rumors abound. The rumors are true. McCaskill versus Price is next.
Jonas versus Habazin could follow.
Give fighters that lost value, that lost interest for the public, for the buying public, and the chickens have come to roost now on that too. So we'll see.
You can't argue with that. I mean, that's
we'll
the
see.
bottom line. But the most telling thing is this: it's one thing to lose a Ray Vargas, a Sabril Matias. It's another thing to lose a Elvis Rodriguez, who's not at the top level, or you haven't scheduled a non-pay-per-view fight, even though they claim when they made their announcement there was going to be a bunch of them and that the first one won't be till June is what I was told, or at least not till June. The most telling thing is when you have signed a 3-fight deal with the number one attraction in the entire sport, and he walks after one fight because you can't deliver. That's where it becomes a big-time problem.
And they do have Gervonta Davis. We should say that, and that could be looming as the June pay-per-view. We don't know. We're waiting.
Let me ask you a question.
We're waiting.
Well, the June event is probably Benavides. Tank Davis would most likely not be till July, potentially even August, summertime in the summer. Do you think that the world is going to be agog and all excited and pumped up to spend $80 on Tank Davis against Frank Martin?
No.
The answer is no.
No. All right.
So hold on, let me just say this.
Yeah.
If Tank Davis, even post Ryan Garcia, which did obviously humongous numbers, before he fought against Ryan Garcia, your normal, and Tank had been on pay-per-view several times against varying degrees of opponents. He was on with Pitbull and Santa Cruz and Hector Luis Garcia and others. Those fights were doing generally in the 250-ish range, maybe a high of 275 or maybe even touched close to 3, and some that were maybe started with a 1, in that 200 somewhere range. Now that was with Showtime behind you and them
promotionally. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And everybody knew, if you're a boxing fan, Showtime.
Heritage. You knew to go there. Right.
They say they over-index on boxing because people understood that's where you saw the big fights. So here's the point. Now you come off the win over Tank, but you're fighting a Frank Martin, who's a good boxer, but has literally zero profile, who's never been in a big fight, was on Showtime a couple of times, has been inactive because he turned down the Shakur fight last fall. Is that going to do more than Hector Luis Garcia?
Does any of this sound familiar? Does it sound like what I've been telling you? That is longtime boxing scribe Dan Rafael on the Big Fight Weekend podcast telling them what I've been telling you. Things aren't looking good for the PBC. They're not looking good at all, and there's more. Boxing insider Rick Glacier said there's rumors abound that Golden Boy Promotions is buying the PBC, and the other rumor is ProBox is buying the PBC. Both boxing companies have rejected buying that quote-unquote bag of bones.
PBC. In actuality, there's nothing very tangible to purchase worth owning. You heard it here first.
2 or 3 days ago, here on this channel, I told you that Al Heyman, he's looking for a buyer. He's looking for someone to buy the PBC off of him, but the problem is there's not much commercial value there, least of all when you lost your most valuable acquisition. You lost Canelo Alvarez.
What's his schedule look like without him?
February is all but done. We're in March now, and still, there's only one fight officially on their calendar. Another they're working on for June in Benavides versus Vajdik. And you heard what Dan said. You heard what Dan Rafael said. Gervonta Davis may not get out there until July?
So what's that, 3 fights in 6 months?
How many fighters can you hope to accommodate with just 3 cards 6 months into the year? That's half the year.
Yeesh.
So when you think about it, if it's the way they say it is, more fighters are going to leave. More fighters are going to float away because they don't have a choice. They have to go where the money is, and the money's not with Al Heyman, which is why he's rumored to be selling his PBC. But according to Rick Glacier, ProBox and Golden Boy, they didn't want to take it off his hands.
The company in its entirety has little to no value.
You wouldn't want to buy the whole thing. No, you'd look at individual fighters that you could use if you were going to bring something over. Say, a young unbeaten guy like an Elijah Garcia at middleweight. I think he's at middleweight.
Unbeaten guy in Brandon Lee.
Gary Antoine Russell. Maybe you can find use for those fighters because they're still young as opposed to what remains of the stable. Guys in their mid to late 30s that aren't that active, they haven't been fighting and don't have much marquee value. That's just a lot of dead weight.
The most that they can be is opponents for fighters that actually have a future.
Given what their asking price might be, they may not have one themselves. Whatever they were going to do in boxing, they must have done it already. Another story. What becomes of a guy who moves a lot like a promoter? He's got a bunch of contracts, but no money to make fights.
He used to have money to make fights. He used to have broadcast partners that gave him a budget, but he doesn't have that anymore. What he does have is contracts on several fighters.
What happens to a guy like that? What becomes of him? If he stays in a sport, if he doesn't leave altogether, he's reduced to being little more than a booking agent, booking sparring and loaning out his fighters.
I mean, so I don't think, if you're talking about suddenly Amazon Prime's going to do a quote unquote blockbuster, I'm still thinking, Tank off the Ryan Garcia fight, maybe he does get a little bit of a bump because he grew his audience a bit on that kind of great, victory for him and a nice knockout. Does it do 250? I don't think so. And that's not some mega blockbuster that makes everybody huge amounts of money. Tank will make good money on the fight, but that's not the kind of thing you can use to make your company, go for the year. In the old days, Don King or Top Rank or whoever would put on some big mega fight and it would do a huge number, 1,000,001, 1,000,000 this, 900,000, and they would make huge money. And the money they reaped on that one event was enough to keep them in business for the whole freaking year.
Right, and put on other events. Right.
Yeah, you do 250 on a Tank fight, you're going to make some money, obviously, but it is not going to keep you in business for the rest of the year. So, like you said, they got some problems. They got to figure them out, and I hope they do figure them out.
It's an aging stable of fighters, the PBC, an aging stable, most of which, these guys ain't got no marquee value, not ticket sellers.
What's supposed to keep them afloat? Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin? David Benavidez versus Oleksandr Vojdik?
Even if you think those are good fights, even if they're good fights, they're not big ones. They're not the kind of fights that generate big cash in order to keep you afloat.
What's the return on that investment?
Zoo versus Thurman. What is that going to bring in at the box office? Don't really have the resources to go out there and scout new and exciting fighters, new and exciting talent in order to usher in the next wave, the next generation of PBC fighters. No, you don't have the resources to do that. What you do have, an aging stable of fighters.
Can't sell out a high school auditorium.
Short of them landing on a new network, landing a new broadcast partner, a real one, a real deal, and not just a distribution deal like what they've got with Amazon.
I give them maybe a year.
That if they don't get a new broadcaster, they can't go on. Not like this. Fighters are going to leave.
The ones who can.
The ones who can't, the ones he's got actionable contracts on, the most that he could do for them is be a booking agent.
Where did they go wrong?
Main event, a Sean Porter, a Caleb Plant. I mean, they had quality guys that were fighting in those shows. The problem was it was like Cowboys and Indians fights. It was not competitive. It was one guy against a nobody. And you can't, you can do that every now and again. And sometimes that's just part of the nature of this sport and matchmaking and everything. But you cannot do that time and again. So the number of events they did on Fox, let's say they did 20 events, there was probably, 15 or 16 of them that were the kind of matchups where you see the result going in. And there were some good ones. I can't knock every one of them. I'm not a hater by any means. So it's not just as easy as going back and saying, hey, would you do more of our fights and pay us a number of dollars? So I would say at the moment, while I said before, I'm not counting out Heyman in any way, shape, or form. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at it and see they've got some issues because they're losing talent. They don't have any non-pay-per-view fights coming up. The pay-per-view that is coming up, it's not a bad show in terms of the matchups, but as a pay-per-view, it's a little bit sketchy. And they just lost the number one superstar in the sport because they couldn't deliver on the promise of what they signed. And, again, I'm not trying to dump on them, but if you make the list, as I like to say, the preponderance of the evidence does not make it look good.
Got former Glendale Gotcha. Given the recent news, Canelo leaving PBC, would you consider a buyout of your PBC contract to cross the street for the Saul fight?
Fuck no.
For anyone who thought that David might entertain the possibility of crossing the street for the biggest fight of his career, there's your answer. And there you have it. I saw his longtime promoter, Samson Lewkowicz, say that loyalty cannot be bought or sold. To whose loyalty is he referring to? His own? To Al Heyman and his sinking ship? Or his fighter's loyalty to him that may cost him life-altering money?
If you want loyalty, get a dog.
This is boxing, and this is a business. Some partnerships do come with an expiration date. I don't see what the benefit is.
What's the upside of David Benavidez staying on the PBC side of things when no matter where you look, you're going to have to deal with somebody else's fighters?
Whether it's Canelo Alvarez on Matchroom, or Dimitri Bivol, or Artur Beterbiev on Top Rank, it's the same story. It's the same thing.
They're on other sides of the street.
And whenever I point out the gravity of that situation, not exclusive to David, but the PBC in general, I always get a couple of guys that are angry with me about it, as if I'm pulling this stuff out of my ass. This is real.
What do you think, I'm telling porkies?
Is Dan Rafael telling them too? And what about boxing insider Rick Glacier? Is it that everybody's lying, everybody's making things up?
Is that it?
Or is it that you don't want to admit you were wrong? You've been wrong. You've been wrong this whole time about Al Heyman's PBC and about Al Heyman and what's supposed to be his business acumen.
Given how much startup money the PBC had, all those hundreds of millions from Waddle and Reed that Al Heyman burned through in a short amount of time,
Given the number of networks that they've already been on, not the ones they bought time on, but the ones they actually got network deals from, like NBC and Fox, Showtime, you can't look at the PBC as anything other than a monumental failure.
Yeah!
A fucking failure.
yeah!
Whenever I bring that up, I always get at least one angry person in the comments. More recently, some broad who says,
You hate Al Heyman!
well, am I supposed to love him? Is it written somewhere on some piece of parchment that I'm supposed to have this adoring veneration for Al Heyman and his PBC? Is that written somewhere?
You're saying anybody that criticizes Al Heyman is a bigot? Is a racist?
Sounds to me like what you're trying to do is control the narrative by laying a guilt trip that relies on the predication that the criticism that he's receiving has anything to do with race.
It's got nothing to do with race, and it's got everything to do with fucking up.
You got kicked off of Fox because
You're fucking up.
got kicked off of Showtime because
You're fucking up.
you lost your most valuable acquisition. You lost Canelo Alvarez because
You're fucking up.
You want me to say it nicer? Is there a nice way for me to say that Al Heyman's fucking up and he's been fucking up and the situation that he's in now is because he's been fucking up?
But you want I shouldn't talk about it.
That a company that had as much startup money as Al Heyman's PBC had could be reduced to this.
You want I shouldn't talk about it.
It's a big story. It's a huge story in the sport of boxing that the PBC is coming dangerously close to being dissolved. And if nothing else, Canelo Alvarez leaving them, that's a big story in and of itself. Just one fight into the deal because you couldn't honor it.
You want I shouldn't talk about it.
Because what they would like for me and you to believe is that Al Heyman always gets what he wants when he so clearly doesn't. That Al Heyman is this wizard, this mythical character like a fucking Pegasus or a unicorn.
You're an idiot.
And if you think that you can gatekeep taboo subjects in order to control the narrative, as it were, you think that by hurling baseless accusations and using them to lay guilt trips,
You think that's gonna work on me?
it's not, because the guilt trip only works if you're guilty. The only thing I'm guilty of is sticking to the facts, sticking to the truth in the pursuit of it, and the truth is, the PBC's in trouble.
Staying loyal to them?
Look at what staying loyal to the PBC got Deontay Wilder. He ended up turning down more money for Anthony Joshua for less money with Tyson Fury, and all that did was get him beat.
You don't see the parallel there between Wilder and David?
David Benavidez, you're saying you wouldn't cross the street, not even for Canelo Alvarez. You're gonna stay loyal to the PBC.
Well, all right.
See what that gets you. But there's no way it works out at 168 or 175 where you don't end up having to deal with somebody else's fighters.
Sooner or later.